Let me just get in here for a second. Thank you.
Bill, how do you see the American economy? What's going to happen in this election? How does it impact it?
When I first started as a professional economist, I spent my time at the Federal Reserve. And when I went to the IMF, they put me in charge of the US desk. And they said, Bill, you're going to have the hardest job at the IMF. And why is that? Because all these economists that we have here, these international economists from Argentina, from Asia, they're all trained in the US. And they know so much about the US economy. The newspapers report exclusively about the US economy. So everybody's a US expert. Right? Everybody's an expert on the U.S. economy. So let me just set the framework for what's normal in the U.S. economy. Number one, right, the unemployment rate between 4 and 4.5% is considered normal. That's about most people's estimate of the natural rate. That's where the economy would be if we're growing at the natural rate of growth, which is about 1.5 to 2%. And the Fed is now targeting inflation to come down to about 2%. And when people say, oh my God, we're in a recession because we went 0.5 percentage point up on the unemployment rate, 3.5 to 4.5%, a huge jump increase. There was no layoffs. Nobody was laying off people. The reason why the unemployment rate went up was because so many people said, wow, opportunities are good now, I should go and look for a job. And more people started looking for a job. So to say that the US economy is teetering on a recession or even in a recession is ridiculous. That's number one.
Well, I think Mr. Trump will probably be saying that right now, but let's not get too deeply into this, because otherwise we're not going to get it through the rest of the world.
But to characterize the U.S. economy, I think to fairly characterize, at least in this expert's opinion, it's doing very well, extraordinarily well. It's been growing at way above potential for several years now because it's rebounded, rightly because Martin said, so much stimulus was put into the economy. Fiscal policy going forward only has two characteristics. One is from the Inflation Reduction Act, which is badly named because it didn't reduce inflation. All it did was reshape medical care. And the CHIPS Act, which is an industrial policy on the part of the United States to try to bring back a lot of manufacturing, especially of high-end semiconductors, into the United States. That's where fiscal policy is right now. It's not doing anything other than reshaping the U.S. economy. It is actually overstimulating, as Martin said, the U.S. economy. Monetary policy is set at a short-term objective of bringing inflation back to 2%, and it seems to have done that. But I think for Korea, the most important part about the U.S. economy right now is what's happening to trade policy. Because as you know, right, Mr. Trump I love tariffs. That's the one campaign that he did from 2016 onward. And Biden and Harris have said, we don't like tariffs, but they're okay. All of you have taken Econ 101. Econ 101, you say, tariffs are terrible. Tariffs distort. Tariffs make you worse off. Tariffs raise inflation. Tariffs lower growth. How much did the tariffs change U.S. growth? 0.3% over 2 years. 0.3%. How much did it raise prices? Consumer prices? Hardly at all. Hardly at all. Because a lot of it was absorbed in profit margins. Now, I think one of the things that you have to learn beyond Econ 101 is that we don't live in a world of free trade. We live in a distorted world. So what the tariff policy is trying to do across countries is to try to reshape your own economy. You're trying to subsidize certain industries, and you're trying to prevent people from over-consuming other sectors. So it's really shifting consumption and shifting production. The first thing you learn about tariff when you take international economics, which I used to teach at Columbia, was tariff is a consumption tax and a production subsidy, right? Those are two things. And it generates revenue.
Bill, we don't have time for your lecture.
But I'm just saying, the message here is, right, tariffs are not necessarily a bad thing. They can be used wisely if they are used wisely.
Well, if Trump wins the election, more tariffs are coming. Frederick, from a European perspective, how do you see the American economy? What's going to happen?
Well, I mean, first of all, I mean, if we look at the broad orientation on trade policy, I think, I mean, the main answer to the question, why didn't Trump's increase in tariffs, why didn't it fuel consumer prices more? Why didn't it fuel inflation more? Well, partly because it was mostly bilateral. And that's what we know from trade policy, which is that if you go against one country, it may be a big country like China, and you raise tariffs on export from that country, what you're going to do is a reshuffling of trade. Exactly. The export you used to get from China is now going to come from other countries, and this is what we've seen in American trade data. However, what the main tariff man, as he now labels himself, Mr. Trump, he wants to raise taxes on all US trade. It's not just about China anymore. He wants to have a 10% tariff on trade with Europe, 10% tariff on trade with Latin America, and I can assure you that is going to have an inflationary impulse in the economy. That's going to have consequences for both raising consumer prices in America and, of course, reducing export competitiveness of US firms, because a lot of this import is going to American manufacturers that then re-exports what they import to the rest of the world.